Middlesbrough have got some big decisions to make with regards to their fringe players. Michael Carrick decided to give a number of squad players the opportunity to impress in the FA Cup match with Blackburn in the third round. But unfortunately, barring one or two displays, no one could really impress him that much. Middlesbrough fell to a 1-0 defeat at the Riverside Stadium. It was an awful game, to be completely honest. No one really sees that opportunity to challenge for a spot in the starting 11, and that means that before the end of January, there could be some players moving on. In this edition, I'm going to go through those squad players, rate them based on whether we should keep them, sell them, or loan them out before the end of January. And drop into the comments below. I want to know what you think about these players as well. Here we go. Tom Glover's one player who I expect could potentially move on before the end of the January transfer window. Glover, the Australian international, is very much the third choice goalkeeper at Middlesbrough at the moment. Seny Dieng held the number 1 jersey for the first part of the season, and then Sol Bryn seemed to claim it towards the back end of last year. Bryn obviously suffered that horrendous injury, which is going to keep him out for a few months. Seny Dieng is also out injured, but once he returns to fitness, you'd expect that he will reclaim that jersey should he stay at the club beyond the end of January. Now, for Glover, that means that he is in an unfortunate position where he is someone who's probably deemed surplus to requirements. There's also been links with Middlesbrough signing Mark Travers, the goalkeeper from Bournemouth, on a loan deal before the end of the January transfer window. And for Glover, that means that his future at the Riverside could be in question. Now, for me, Glover's a player who quite simply isn't good enough for Middlesbrough in the Championship. So that means that if the opportunity was there to sell him, to move him on, I'd certainly be doing that. So my verdict on Tom Glover is to sell. Lucas Angel, he's a player that I sort of feel sorry for. He signed in the summer of 2023. One of the players who was brought in as a potential replacement for Ryan Giles following his loan spell at Middlesbrough. And it just hasn't really worked out for him. He's a player who is clearly a good egg, so to speak. He's someone who is a decent performer. He's a decent defender. He's all right going forward. But for Middlesbrough, if we are going to be challenging for promotion, I do think that he's someone who is very much upgradable. Now, Neto Borges is very much Middlesbrough's first choice left back. At the moment, there's a wider question about that left back position because I do think that it's a position which is still a bit of a problem area for Michael Carrick. But as far as Lucas Engel's concerned, I think that he is someone who could potentially be moved on. Now, in my opinion, this is probably going to depend on what's going on with Alex Bangura. He's a player who is very highly rated by Middlesbrough. I think he's seen by many as probably who was going to be the natural successor to Ryan Giles at the Riverside Stadium. But given his injury problems, it seems that we can't really rely on him at the moment. I don't think Middlesbrough need 3 senior left backs at the club. So it is a situation, in my opinion, where if Alex Bangura was to come back and was to prove his fitness, I do think that Lucas Engel could be someone who was deemed surplus to requirements. So my verdict on him would be to sell, given the conditions that I've just set out. Dan Barlaser is a tricky situation to assess, really. Middlesbrough's central midfield is an area which has got a lot of airtime recently, to be honest. It is an area where Middlesbrough are sort of well stocked in one sense. We do have a number of options in there challenging for positions, but there seems to be a real sort of gap in quality in that central midfield area. I think we've got Hayden Hackney and we've got Aidan Morris, who are very much Middlesbrough's first choice central midfielders. If both are fit, they're the players who will start pretty much every game. We've got Johnny Howson as well, who is obviously the club captain, but he's not getting any younger. He's also struggled with injuries this season, which has meant that he hasn't really played a huge amount. Now, Dan Barlaser is the other senior option in that midfield area, but I think what we've seen over the last few months in particular is just what his kind of limitations are. In my opinion, Dan Barlaser is a player who is great when Middlesbrough have a lot of the ball, playing against a sort of bottom 8 championship team where we are going to dictate play and we're going to have the opportunities to carve them open. But against everyone else, he does seem a little bit vulnerable. I don't think his passing ability is quite good enough to penetrate the best defences in the Championship. Defensively, he can be caught out. He is quite easy to play around, which we've seen on a number of occasions as well, particularly against some of the big boys in the likes of Leeds United. So for me, Dan Barlaser is someone who, should a replacement be signed, he is someone who I expect to move on before too long. I'm not sure whether that will happen in January. It's probably unlikely because given Aidan Morris's injury problems, Dan Barlaser is playing a lot of football, and he's a decent enough option to keep that place in the team right now. But I do expect that Barlaser could be one to possibly watch out for as we get towards the summer transfer window. He is a very upgradable player, and it is a position I expect Middlesbrough to strengthen either in January or in the summer, and that for Barlaser could lead to the end of his Middlesbrough career. So my verdict is to sell, but probably in the summer. Law McCabe is a really interesting one. He's a very, very talented young midfielder. At the time of recording, he's 18. I think he's expected to turn 19 in the next week or so during the January transfer window. He's someone who's only played a few games for Middlesbrough's first team, but he's very, very highly rated by Michael Carrick. He played against Blackburn in the FA Cup third round, and he was someone who was probably one of the only names to come out with any sort of real credit. I don't think any player on the pitch for Middlesbrough was good against Blackburn Rovers, but I think Law McCabe, given his age and his lack of experience, there was certainly some promise there. In my opinion, Law McCabe is someone who could have the potential to challenge for one of those starting spots in Middlesbrough's midfield in the future. I don't think he's there just yet, and it's very much a case of how Michael Carrick and the team manages development moving forward. I don't expect him to play a lot of minutes between now and the sort of end of the season. I think there's been a bit of speculation that he could potentially leave the club on loan. That could be to a League One team or a League Two team. But in my opinion, I probably would be keeping him around the first team. In the reasons that I've mentioned previous. We don't really have a huge amount of quality in midfield, and with Aidan Morris out injured, I think I personally would be trying to give him an opportunity to step up and to see how he sort of develops. I think he is someone who won't start a lot of games between now and the end of the season, but for me, I'd be getting him on the bench and trying to give him as much game time as possible, because you just sort of look back to someone like Hayden Hackney. He was a talented young player. Had a few loans out, and he was doing okay, but didn't really look like he was going to be breaking into Middlesbrough's first team anytime soon. But then Michael Carrick came in. He was thrust into the first team fold and given plenty of minutes at the first team, and his development just accelerated from there. And then he very quickly became a very good championship level player. Law McCabe, in my opinion, is someone who has that same potential, someone who could potentially do that and step up to become a first team player for Middlesbrough. But it's going to be up to Michael Carrick to make sure that his game time is managed and to make sure that he does have the opportunities to try and grow and develop and turn into that sort of player. So my verdict on him is to keep him. I would keep him around the first team, but should Michael Carrick decide that he's not going to get those minutes, I think he certainly needs to be playing first team football, so he may well choose to loan him out. But for me, I'd be keeping him around the squad all day long, giving him some minutes and hopefully seeing him develop into the player that I think a lot of people know that he could become. Now, Riley McGree is someone who may surprise a few people by being on this list. Typically, he would be described as a first-team player. You might have noticed in this list, I'm not going for the typical subjects of the players like Ben Doak and Emmanuel Latte, who might attract January interest. This is very much about the players on the periphery of Michael Carrick's first team. And for Riley McGree, he's someone who has fallen into that category this season. Playing on that left side of midfield, he has sort of fallen out of favour. He is rotated with Delano Bergzorg, but in my personal opinion, I think Bergzorg is the best left-sided player at the club. If I was picking Middlesbrough's best 11, Bergzorg would be in it, and Riley McGree wouldn't, because he just hasn't been able to find his form this season. And being completely honest, I think over the last couple of years, Riley McGree is someone who's quite inconsistent. When he's at his best, he's absolutely brilliant, one of the best players in the Championship, but we just haven't seen it enough from him, which for me is really frustrating, because it's very, very clear to see the qualities that he has on offer. Now, for me, Riley McGree is someone who I can't see Middlesbrough forcing out of the club. He is someone who is good for the club. He's someone who's good to have as a competition for places, someone who will contribute between now and the end of the season. But he is someone who I believe, if an offer was to come in for him, Middlesbrough could be tempted to move him on. He's a similar sort of player in terms of status to Isaiah Jones. Obviously, Jones moved on to Luton for a fee worth around about £5 million. And I think Riley McGree is someone who, similarly to Jones, is someone who wouldn't be the biggest miss to the first team, given that we do have other options such as Delano Bergzorg. But he is someone who's good enough to attract a substantial fee. So I think if Middlesbrough were to get a decent fee, or someone was to try their luck with an offer of a few million for him in January, I think Middlesbrough would have a big decision to make. Like I said, I don't think he's an unsellable player. I don't think he's someone who Middlesbrough would miss hugely. if he was to move on. So if someone was to come in for a bid for him before the end of the January transfer window, I would probably be considering selling him, because he could be an easy way to rake in an extra few million, which could then be reinvested in other areas of the squad. So yeah, an interesting one with Riley McGree. Drop into the comments below and let me know what you think about him, because it is quite an interesting one. And I'm sure a few people might not agree with that take that I've just given. But for me, yeah, he is someone who could potentially move on, and he could be an opportunity to bring in some money. Micah Hamilton is a very interesting topic of conversation. He's someone who arrived at Middlesbrough last summer from Manchester City. Very, very highly rated. Someone who was on the periphery of the first team at Man City last season. He played a few games for Pep Guardiola's team. He played in the Champions League and even scored a goal there. So he was someone who was very, very much expected to sort of be that that next generation of player to break through at Man City. Obviously, they've had the likes of Phil Foden and Cole Palmer, and more recently, there's been other players who've kind of broken through at Man City. And everyone thought he was going to be that player. Everyone was a bit surprised when he moved to Middlesbrough over the summer, but the hope was that he was going to come to Middlesbrough and really hit the ground running. Establish himself in the first team, show his qualities, and probably in a similar vein to Morgan Rogers, earn a fairly swift move back to the Premier League. But it just hasn't happened for him. In the time that he's been at the club, he just really hasn't looked himself. He hasn't looked the sort of explosive player that we saw at Man City. At Man City, he was more than happy to get on the ball, take on his man, get a shot away. He just seems to have lost that sort of dynamic edge to his play. It's probably a confidence issue based on what he looks like when he's on the pitch. And that's a real shame, because Micah Hamilton is clearly a very talented player. And in terms of the players that Middlesbrough actually own, he's probably one of the players with the highest ceiling in terms of potential. So for him, it's going to be an interesting January. The opportunity to play against Blackburn was a big one. It was a great chance for him to go out there, play from the start against a decent championship team, and prove that he was capable of being a first-team player for Middlesbrough. But he just didn't really do it. He did try to get around his defender a couple of times, playing on that right side, but ultimately he was brought off in the second half and didn't really make that big a contribution. So it'll be interesting to see what Middlesbrough do with him, whether he's a player who's allowed to leave on loan in January. That could be beneficial to him. He could be a player who would go out to a club in League One or even somewhere abroad and play some regular first-team football and just sort of reignite that spark and reignite that confidence, and ultimately show Middlesbrough fans what they're missing and come back in the summer brimming with confidence and ready to go. But if not, he is someone that could potentially be kept around the squad by Michael Carrick. You do just sort of think that he needs a moment to click, whether it's a goal, an assist, a moment of magic. I think fans just need to see something from him to go, yeah, that's the player that we thought he was going to be. And I hope that'll happen, because I'm a big fan of Micah Hamilton. I did see a reasonable amount of him when he was at Man City, and he is a very, very talented young lad. For me, my verdict would be to keep him at Middlesbrough. I'd like to see more of him. I'd like to see him given more of an opportunity and a chance to show what he can do, and to show that he is the player that can fulfill his potential. But unfortunately, so far, he has been given some opportunities and he simply hasn't taken them. So it is going to be on him to go out there, prove fans wrong, prove Michael Carrick wrong, and prove that he can be someone who is a first-team regular for Middlesbrough and someone who can help them to promotion. So my verdict on him would be to keep him, but it's very much a case of needing to show something a little bit more to prove to fans that he is capable of being the first-team star that we hope he can be. The next player on the list is Alex Gilbert. Now, he's someone who has had a really, really interesting 6 to 9 months, really. 9 months ago, he was someone who was so far down the pecking order at Middlesbrough. He was sort of starting to fall into that category of like, what's going on with Alex Gilbert? He was brought in from Brentford. He was expected to be talented, but he hadn't really been in and around the first team. But towards the back end of last season, he really showed his qualities. He got a couple of goals. He got a couple of assists in the remaining championship fixtures of last season, which was really good for him, really good for his confidence, and it gave fans a glimpse of what he could offer. Coming into this season, I think a lot of people expected that he would go out on loan for the season, but again, he played those first few games and was really, really impressive. That performance against Leeds in the Carabao Cup in August was absolutely outstanding. And he was looking like a real player, someone who was going to play a massive role under Michael Carrick this season. Now, he did pick up an injury, which has kept him out for a little while of the first half of the season. But now he's back and he's looking really hungry to show what he can do. Against Blackburn, like I said, no one was particularly good, but Alex Gilbert was definitely keen to impress. He was dropping into positions to pick up the ball. He was trying to make things happen. He was dynamic. And for me, he is someone who could offer something really important for Middlesbrough in the second half of the season. He's got a real challenge on his hands. Competing with Finn Azaz for his place in the team. That's what I was trying to say there. So that's going to be difficult for him because Finn Azaz on his day is probably one of the best players in the Championship. So for Gilbert, that will be difficult. But I do think that Gilbert has a lot to offer. I do think it will get game time between now and the end of the season. And I certainly wouldn't want to see him going out on loan for the second half of the season, because for me, he is good enough to play a role for Middlesbrough, whether he's doing it in that number 10 role, whether he's being utilised somewhere different. Technically, he's a very good player. He's someone who's very hungry, very keen to succeed. And for me, I'd be keeping him around the first team at Middlesbrough because, like I said, I think he's got goals and assists in him. He's someone who has that little bit of spark and someone who I believe could have a big future at Middlesbrough in the second half of the season, but also beyond that moving forward. So I'm keen to hear from you. I want to know what you think of the players that I've discussed. Let me know in the comments below. I'll drop the other list of players in there so that you can have a look through them and you can go through and let me know whether you want to keep them, to sell them, to loan them out during the January transfer window. There's some interesting players to discuss there, and it is going to divide opinion a little bit what we should do with them. Because obviously that's what football's about. It's a game of opinions. I've got mine and you will have yours as well. So drop into the comments below. Let me know what you think. And if you have enjoyed this video, do hit subscribe as well, because there's going to be plenty more coming up. Catch you later.